Yeah, okay, so where we were, English phonesthemes, German, we see a similar story. Actually, what I was talking about before it cut out was, let me get my little pointer back here. Well, conceal, condemn, concert, construe. That's clearly fossilized derivational morphology from Latin. In German, we have a similar story. Look at the most common one was ge. So geschehen. This is a participial ending, and Gebiet, good. That's also a nominal ending. That means like a, it's hard to explain what it means. But a good example would be like Busch versus Gebüsche. Would be like a bush is a single bush, but Gebüsch is like a group of bushes. It means like it sort of has a weird, it has a weird sort of non-countability aspect to it. So Gerücht, for instance, is a rumor because like it's like a thing that's happening about. Here we see a weird verbal thing, and here we see b, as I was talking about before. This is a fossilized derivational ending. As is ein. You know this, if you know German, this is a prefix. But other things like this are clearly derivational endings, and this is why I remember I pointed before that German was a bit higher than the other languages, and the reason is that the data is poorly annotated. But I would note this isn't really actually an issue with the North Eurolex results because those focus on basic concepts. These are actually some long tail phenomena. Like these are some rare words. So a fun anecdote about our work. If you want to read a takedown piece after it was published, someone wrote a nice Medium post. So Rob Malouf's actually a very nice guy. Kat mentioned him as well. He really seems to like to take down our work. But he's in a nice way, in like the spirit of academic discourse, you know, the way perhaps it used to be. But you can read about how he says our paper that almost won an award shouldn't have even been published. So very strong opinion if you like that sort of thing. I always try and promote the negative aspects of academic work just because it's you know, makes it more fun. But anyway, his point here, to summarize what he was saying, is more or less that he's right in a sense. We measured something everyone believed to be true. And a lot of people believed what we found to be true. They believe phonesthemes exist. And there's sort of an interesting philosophical argument about whether there's value in a clean operationalization of something. But yeah, you could read what he says. It's fun. So in conclusion, we have a novel information theoretic operationalization of systematicity. We discussed how to do a simple approximation. And we find evidence for non-trivial systematicity in many languages. By that, I mean not morphological. Our method can identify phonesthemes. And we sort of confirmed, in a sense, we've confirmed Saussure's hypothesis. Last time I gave a talk like this, people asked me whether we confirmed it or not. And I said, well, it's a basically arbitrary. Like if you say English is 3% arbitrary, did you confirm or deny? I don't know. I mean, it's very, very arbitrary in the end. But there's still something there. Sort of the take-home message. But so, is that it? Yeah. So thanks. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ryan. I think at some point we couldn't hear you very clearly. I think that happened around the slide number 23. So we received a few requests in the chat to repeat this slide and what you said about that.
Sure. Sorry about that.
The 23.
Let me reshare my. Sorry, stop screen share. So let's see. This one.
Yeah, possibly the one before this one.
Right. Okay. So these are the methods. These are the phonesthemes that we found. So basically, what I was saying is that we have, you know, we found the classic ones. So this wasn't sort of a confirmation bias situation because GL and FL are the classic phonesthemes in English. But I also said if you want, and I say Trump here, I mentioned that is a -1 in English. You see there's a lot of commentary on this particular aspect. So there's a podcast by George Lakoff about the suffix because of Trump. And that's sort of interesting thing, because Trump is actually a positive word, like the Trump card, but it's got like a negative phonosteme at the end. And here we sort of have an example of our method coming up with something spurious. So this is bad, right? Con, because conceal, condemn, of course, there's going to be some meaning related to the con suffix, because these words, or the con prefix, these words are inherited from Latin, where it was a productive prefix. So the fact that we inherited these fossilized, this is a fossilized derivational relationship. So that's not great. But nevertheless, it sort of shows the method's working. The fact that we can detect things like con having a relationship to meaning is interesting. And things like this is interesting. Like you look at this class, the K class. So this is unusual for English phonotactics. But what's found is that these are effectively sort of like ethnic foods, like yucca and hookah and mica. And remember, this is an IPA, so these are the same. But it's basically found that there's a relationship between K, which very few English words end in K, and being something you eat or smoke or that sort of thing. Although circa, I guess, is just a Latin word. But these are sort of a foreign word cluster, which is something you also seen, right? Like here's another one: henna, savannah, fauna, alumna. So fauna and senna, like you can see why these words are semantically similar, right? Fauna live on a savanna, a big fauna. Like the word fauna in English means big animals, more or less, as a scientific word. But you wouldn't use it, like you wouldn't describe. I mean, there must be a similar Russian word, I suspect, the scientific word fauna.
Yes.
You say like flora and fauna is what we say. But you wouldn't use this word out of the scientific context. And savanna is also like when people describe geographic areas. So you can see why these lexically cluster together, and it's picking up on Latin phonotactics. And that's sort of a level of trivial systematicity and not what people meant by phonesthemes. So another common one that's not here are like drug names. So things that end in like diazepine, those sorts of endings tend to be related to medicine. So many things like that exist in our lexicon. And we think that's sort of the bulk of this 2% effect is coming from. Okay, do you guys have any other slides? I should repeat, or any questions?
Yes. May I ask a question?
Of course.
Ryan, thank you very much. It was very interesting that you really can measure the percentage of iconic signs in languages. But you must, of course, you know that there was a well-known paper by Roman Jacobson about it was called In Quest of the Essence of Language, where he was opposing Saussure about iconicity in languages. Like iconic signs are, they do not how to say, are not restricted to phonestemic things. There is another aspect of iconicity that Jacobson called diagrammatic aspect. That reflects the similarity of meaning by similarity of quantitative relations between, or quantitative or the order of elements in a sign, reflecting the order of concepts in a concept. Another aspect that asks for another kind of machinery for counting the this arbitrariness of language. So iconicity has two aspects. One of the aspects is the thing that you measured by your very nice formula. And another aspect is left untouched by your methodology.
So I'm not familiar with that paper by Jakobsen, so I'd have to take a look at it. I mean, of course, I know Jakobsen's work overall. His work touched on very many things.
Maybe then I shall give an example of what he meant by diagrammatic iconicity of science, of linguistic science. For example, the form of the plural forms are have more phonemes in their in the sign than the singular forms. Or when we say veni vidi vici or vici, then it reflects the real order of events we describe, and many other things that show that languages are not so arbitrary as we may think if we only take into account this imagery of language that is presented by Phonesthemes.
So could I relate this to Jakobsen's work on he tried to relate the age at which child acquired phonemes to their typological prevalence. So you could basically talk about cross-linguistic marking. So he would say that universally unvoiced consonants are more or less marked than voiced consonants. And that's a linguistic universal of the iconicity, because when you say that plurals are cross-linguistically longer than singulars, the tendency would be that unmarked forms, and the singular is typically viewed as the unmarked plural, or then the unmarked form of the singular plural distinction, tend to be shorter than marked forms. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Irina Mikhailovna, your microphone is off.
Irina Mikhailovna, can you turn the mic on? We can hear you.
Yes. Yes. I have not finished, you think? Yeah, well, I think that there's also one important point in non-arbitrariness of language, but interlinguistically, not cross-linguistically. And it's the models of polysemy.
Yeah, I mean, you're right though, that non-word-based levels, like the example of the idea that the ordering of events should in language should reflect the ordering of events in real life, is not going to be captured by word level inspection.
Of course.
But your first example was about the length. So we are that's I think that goes back to the markingness. So we're not going to capture things like that. We will capture things about frequency and length. So Zipf's law is of course in that sense a similar form of non-arbitrariness, right? That longer words tend to be more complex concepts.
So, well, I have nothing to say more than that iconicity in a language is not restricted to the things you measured. That's right. That's what I wanted to say.
That's certainly true. So I mean, we can't really rebut that, can we?
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. I'll look up his paper, the Jakobsen paper. I haven't read Jakobsen in many years.
No, not only Jakobsen, of course, but there are many typological papers, collection of papers on iconicity in languages that you may have a look at.
Well, Jakobsen sort of has a special place in American linguistics because, you know, well, his role at MIT. but I guess he also was a Russian, wasn't he originally?
Yes, he was.
Dear colleagues, are there further questions? I think I have a little curiosity question to Ekaterina.
Yes.
My impression is that the systems you've been talking about involve sort of taxonomy of inflectional categories and their values, which makes perfect sense. But on the other hand, across languages, we find languages and we find paradigms that contain morphological elements that are difficult to associate with a particular inflectional category. It looks like they are there just for the whole thing to be well formed. Some people call them thematic elements, or others analyze them as epenthetic elements. So I'm curious whether dealing with this type of morphology has produced any additional complication for your study. Can you see what I mean?
So there are certain, like in terms of unimorph, so of course there is some kind of like trade-off between be it too much like in particular linguistics, like if you use like Martin Haspelmath terminology, so you have like general and particular when it's too much language specific and when it's too kind of universal. So in the unimorph, so we try to kind of if there are such kind of categories, so we some of those categories just transformed into sort of like specific tags that try to be more like add some generalization over them. So we do not do so much like be too much specific to certain biases of annotation, for instance. But of course, there are some like always the problem how like, for instance, like in tense, aspect and mood, like it's always confusing, like there is no like strict line between this. So if, for instance, like we had recently a Papua New Guinean language where it's not really like a kind of boundary between these three categories. So it's kind of basically some decision of a linguist how they decide to assign whether you assign some feature to tense or it's assigned to aspect. So it's a lot of just like linguist specific decisions. But overall, yes, we're trying to kind of avoid like this, like to go into like language specific annotation.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. So there are questions that appear in the chat. Shall I read them? So one
Sorry,
question.
I actually have to leave for a bit to attend a faculty meeting, which I assure you is not as interesting as this. But I'm happy to answer questions over email or arrange another meeting if that's okay. So I have to duck out for a bit. But thank you so much for hosting me.
So we at least have two questions okay. In the chat.
So what do you think?
Can you see it?
Yes, I can see them. So what do you think about running a task on inflection in context? So we basically organized this in 2018. So when we asked the systems, so yeah, let me just continue, like I'll try to finish, maybe I misunderstood. So you have a sentence with lemma morphosyntactic features, and the task is to convert each lemma to an inflected form, possibly form a final sentence. So yes, so we basically had exactly the same task in 2018. So when we provided a contextual, so instead of the specific tags for the slot, so these tags were replaced with the context that surrounded this specific target word form. And yes, we either provided just surface forms, or we also additionally sometimes provided their tags and evaluated how much you can predict this. So in general, so the systems, I need to double check the our accuracy numbers, but in general it was, I think, about not 80%, but it would be nice to double check. But the challenge here is that some categories are kind of inherent categories. So I had a paper about this, like if and some are contextual. So you need to, when you do such annotation of data for such task, you need to distinguish these cases. For instance, if you have like a sentence that, for instance, я гуляю, and you replace гуляю with гулять, so it's not clear what tense there should be, because tenses inherit unless you just provide it explicitly like вчера. So, and you need to kind of separate these cases. So you need to only have the cases where you can predict the form from the agreement. Otherwise, it's like if it's inherent, for instance, like there was the cat sat on the mat. So you can have cats and you can have cat. So the number of nouns is also inherent category. Of course, in Russian, if you have like an adjective and a noun and you provide adjective and want to predict what should be on the noun, since they are in agreement, so you can do such prediction. So yes, if you look at our 2018 task, and I also had a paper about this in 2019 at NACL. So it's called contextualized morphological inflection. So you probably, so it's maybe, I think it's addresses the question. So the second one, were the examples in Tibetan given in the original script? Yes, they were given in the original script. So this was the challenge for neural systems, because the script is kind of two-dimensional. So you need to put these extra components all together. So some systems, they mispredicted the kind of position of these components. So they're making this kind of impossible combinations. But yeah, I should note that if you're training like multilingual system, so one of the works done by Antonis and Anastosopoulos, so they showed that if you do some kind of romanization of scripts, for instance, if they use Cyrillic or some other scripts, so it generally helps to improve general like performance.
Thank you. And I believe Alexei has a question.
I have
Yeah.
a question. Kati, could you open the slide with the results for some languages? There were Romanian and Russian on some slide with percentage referring to some shared task.
Let me try to find it first. So Romanian, so it's probably not the first shared task. So it was Romanian, Russian, and what else?
They were in the alphabetic order for large, medium, and low resource setting, I think.
Maybe I found, let me try to share and you'll say whether it's the slide you're referring to. So is it this one?
Yeah, that's it. So, for example, the results on most of the languages are continuously improving from 2016 until now. For example, 4 years ago, we were happy about having, as I remember, 91 on Russian or something like that. Now we have 94, and on at least half of the languages, we have numbers about 98, 99. But so, then the question is, what do these numbers mean? For example, what does it mean that we have 89 on Romanian? It's the amount of systematicity we can predict, and other 10 or 11% are just arbitrary. Or our systems are just weak for that particular language. can we somehow measure the upper bound on the performance on the system, at least indirectly?
So the upper bound, we typically measure upper bound by taking like this oracle accuracy. So oracle means that it takes all the predictions into account, and if at least one prediction was correct, so we kind of have added to the score. So for Romanian, we did not look at the Romanian data in detail. So it must be either allomorphy related errors, or there might be also some problems with extraction from dictionary. So it's, yeah, we should check whether like.
But well, again, with when you have an oracle performance, it's again the bound for one particular type of systems, because nowadays everyone uses sec-to-sec with some attention mechanism, and what I ask.
It's not one particular. So you still have some sort of. First of all, we have some non-neural baselines. And we also had the systems that like this from CEO Boulder. So it's a team with Mansholden, so who developed, first they also used the finite state approaches and also the handmade rules. So it still kind of adds probably like some variation. So it's not just neural.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So for some, when we have the performance about 100%, it usually means that the part of the derivation for that language present in the data set is described by some simple mechanism, say finite state machine with a low number of states. Were there attempts to distill that automaton or something like that from the neural models that were trained on data?
Not yet. So we did not do any kind of such distinction. But of course, so like for some languages, for instance, in this year, so we had Uzbek data, what was derived from finite state transducers, and also some like this, as I mentioned, Niger Congo. So it was derived from the grammar books that only listed about 100, and I guess most regular forms. So of course, it kind of poses the question whether it's all like about the language, or we can actually add something else. Okay. So if there, like if in finite state, you also might not have all the exceptions and so on. Yeah, I was thinking like we could also maybe look at the, so we wanted to extract the data from a Aperture and also from Wiktionary by just inspecting the Wiktionary, the way the tables are generated, because they're typically generated with this lower code that lists like all the heuristics and exceptions and everything.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
but yeah, when we evaluated, or at the moment, so we did not distinguish like in terms of like the source of the data. So some sources are pretty good and clean, and some languages are indeed quite clean. But of course, there are some like issues in certain, like for instance, like in Middle Low German, I guess there is also some problem with the data.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's time for me to express our deepest gratitude to our speakers for coming, for being here, and for the exciting talk, 2 exciting talks, in fact, they gave. We were very happy and honored to have you guys here. Thanks for coming, and thank you for the talk.
Yeah, thank you so
Katerina,
much.
Ryan, thanks a lot.
Thank you.